Okay, everyone, welcome to Perashat Re'eh, and let's talk. The formula for moral behavior. Wouldn't that be nice to know? I think that is embedded in our parasha if we dig deeply enough. But it's going to take some research. So let's start. In the beginning of the parasha, and I'll tell you an exact pasuk. We're in Perek Yud Bet rather, pasuk Het. In the context of Moshe Rabbeinu telling Am Yisrael about the way korbanot will be brought when they get into Eretz Yisrael relative to Yerushalayim and the Bet HaMikdash, he says as follows: Lo ta'asun kecho asher anachnu osim po hayom, ish kol hayashad be'anav. Don't do everything that's being done today. Every person, kol hayashad be'anav. What does that mean, kol hayashad be'anav? What is the warning Moshe Rabbeinu is giving? Well, according to Rashi, this is referring to the idea of sacrificing on bamot, on personal altars, which was permitted at that time in the desert. And even during the Mishkan in the desert, it was permitted. And according to Rashi, the warning is that once you get into Eretz Yisrael, the only thing when there's the Mishkan, Bet HaMikdash, different deal altogether, but when there's the Mishkan, when we first enter the land, you'll be able to offer your sacrifices on private altars, but only Nedarim Udavot, only donated sacrifices, not sin offerings. Therefore, according to Rashi, this is not you. Okay, please keep yourselves on mute. Therefore, according to Rashi, when it says, don't do everything we're doing today, the words, ish hayashad be'anav, kol hayashad be'anav, is actually the exception. The only thing you'll be able to do is offer on your private altars a korban of neder or nedava, donated, and that's ish hayashad. And therefore, that term is really what's allowed, the exception. The Ramban explains more along the lines of the simple reading, and that is, ish hayashar be'anav is what you shouldn't do. In other words, in contrast to the way we're offering sacrifices, the korbanot here in the desert, which is ish hayashar be'anav, you will not be able to do that when you enter the land. What are we doing here? Well, over here, you can eat a korban with no boundaries, regardless of where you are. You can go anywhere in the desert and eat your korban. Of course, in the Bet HaMikdash, there are boundaries in terms, depending on which korban, how distant you are to eat your korban. You can bring korban up regardless of where the Mishkan is. There is no mizvah to visit the Mishkan, like there's a mizvah with the Bet HaMikdash, Aliyah Laregel, on the holidays. So there will be a lot of limitations. In other words, today, ish hayashad be'anav, kol hayashad be'anav. Today we can do whatever we want. So there is a negative connotation to that terminology. Ish kol hayashad be'anav sounds like do whatever you want. And we really see that terminology used famously in a negative manner at the end of the book of Shoftim, where we're told, it's literally the last pasuk in the book of Shoftim, where we are told that Bayamim Ahen en Melech BeYisrael, Ish Hayashar Be'anav Ya'aseh. In those days, before the first king, Shaul HaMelech, there were no kings, and Ish Hayashar Be'anav Ya'aseh. It connotes almost chaos, right? Like a free-for-all, it sounds like. Very negative connotation. Just doing whatever you want. Hayashad be'anav, go ahead, have a ball. But the truth is, if you think of the word yashar, if I were to tell you, you know that person, he's really yashar, he's a yashar person. What does that imply to you? What traits first come upon your mind when you think of the word yashar? I would think of someone who's forthright, honest, perhaps someone who embodies integrity, morality, ethics. This guy, he's Yashar. Very positive connotations. So the implication of Ish Kol Hayashar Be'anav or Hayashar Be'anav Ya'aseh is very different from we conventionally use the word Yashar. To be sure, in the Emek Davar, the famous commentary written by the Nesiv on Chumash, in his introduction to Sefer Bereshit, he speaks about the fact that the nickname of Sefer Bereshit is Sefer HaYashar, and that is because the Avot are called Yesharim, because they dealt with everyone who crossed their path, with whom they confronted, even the worst people, in a proper, respectful, and cordial manner. And therefore, the forefathers were called Yesharim, and the book is called Sefer HaYashar. So how do we reconcile this discrepancy? Where the implication is in our parasha, in the book of Shoftim, Hayashar Ba'anafta says negative, but you call someone Yashar seems very positive. Well, to get to that answer, we're going to have to focus on a pasuk, will be our pasuk of focus in the parasha, or maybe more than one pasuk. But let's travel now towards the end of the same perek in our parasha. We're going to pasuk Kaf Het. And there Moshe Rabbeinu says as follows. Shemot v'shamata, I want you to keep and observe all the dictates and mitzvot I'm giving you. L'ma'an yitav lecha u'barecha acharecha ad olam, in order so that Hashem can bestow upon yourself and your descendants goodness eternally. Ki ta'aseh hatov v'hayashar b'anei Adonai Elohecha. When you do, and here's the key term, hatov v'hayashar, in the eyes of God. What is tov? We want to say good, and yashar, in the eyes of God. Even more directly, if you go back to Perashat Hanan, a few weeks ago, said more as a charge or a directive. Moshe Rabbeinu said, as a messenger of God, Va'asita hayashar v'hatov b'anei Adonai. And you shall do, and the words are flipped, interesting notation to make, you shall do hayashar v'hatov in the eyes of God, in order so that God bestows upon you good and it'll be in your best interest. There those words are, hatov hayashar v'hayashar v'hatov, and here it looks like that it is a command. What's the command of doing hatov v'hayashar? The Ramban back there in Vat Hanan famously says as follows, based on the Midrash. The Midrash says this is referring to behaving lifnim mishurat hadin, meaning going above and beyond what's expected to you from the letter of the law. And the Ramban explains as follows. It would be impossible or quite unrealistic the Torah to provide for us a law to direct us in every single situation in life that we find ourselves in. In every interaction with another person, in every single predicament that we find ourselves, a detailed law to direct that exact predicament. When you go to the store on the corner of Avenue J and you're online and someone wants to cut the line, but here's the law. Unrealistic. Instead, says the Ramban, what the Torah does is lay out for you fundamental principles, basic laws, ben adam lehaviro in this case, and principles to instruct you in general. We're expected in our specific predicaments and situations in life to be able to apply those laws, to use those principles to instruct our behavior in every single situation. Says the Ramban, that is the command of doing hayashar v'hatov b'anei Adonai. Hayashar v'hatov is taking Hashem's general laws and principles and applying them and using them to instruct your behavior in specific situations. Wow. How do we get from Ish hayashar be'anav, this implication of chaos and free-for-all, Just adding the word tov, we all of a sudden go to this genuine mode of behavior, this formula of how to carry ourselves in life, hatov hayashar, adding tov to the formula with a game changer. How is that? And I think the answer is in a pasuk. All those who join me in our Kohelet class could appreciate this, a pasuk from Kohelet, where Shlomo HaMelech says, Adonai asa et ha'adam yashar. God created man yashar. And that refers to man's innate ability to act properly, to act kindly and with compassion and with empathy. That refers to man's nature, built-in nature, being wired to be proper, to act morally, to act with justice, to behave ethically. Man, God made man yashar. You know what the problem is with yashar? Yashar is subjective. What is good? What is moral? What is considered to be ethical behavior? Well, that is relative to time and place. Man's standards of what is considered to be good, or yashar in this case, is constantly changing. His moral standards are constantly changing depending on time and place. And therefore it's completely subjective. So you can't just leave me off, God, in this yashar nature with which you implanted, with which you wired me and which you implanted in me. I need something else. In steps tov. Tov is the famous term with which God created the world. Vayar Elohim ki tov. Every time God created something on 7 days of creation, he saw that it was good. Tov refers to God's perfection. Tov refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in his creation, which is the only absolute truth. It's not relative, it is absolute. And by extension, God's Torah is Tov, it's perfection. And therefore, Hashem tells man, I have the perfect formula for you. Take your yashar, your innate tendency to be good, to want to seek out morality, which is undisciplined, and reign with my tov. Use my dictates, use my laws, use my mitzvot to be your moral compass, to channel your natural tendency to act yashar, and use the Torah, use the only absolute truth, which is me and my blueprint for life, my Torah, add it to your nature of yashrut, and there you have the formula of behavior. Tov v'yashar, yashar v'tov, depending on which pasuk you use. That's the formula. It is that man has sometimes an always changing standard of morality and sometimes descending standard of morality, depending on what society we live in a time and place. And man, therefore, sometimes says something is good here, where there it's not considered to be good. 100 years ago, that was moral behavior. 100 years later, it's abominable behavior, or vice versa. And man is always in this conundrum of trying to standardize goodness, morality, compassion, sensitivity, to what, to who? And Hashem says, your yashar, your nature is just not good enough. I need you to behave tov v'yashar. Take the only absolute truth. Gentlemen, I can tell you, or ladies who will listen to this recording as well, I can tell you that this principle, tov v'yashar, is one in which we have no chance in surviving as moral Jews in the world without it. Because otherwise, the world will take its relative yashar definition in a given time and place and lead us astray. There's so many examples of this. Here's one at risk of being incorrect politically, non-politically correct, which is okay. In our day and age, the LGBTQ community, the idea of free love. Now, when you think of it, it sounds very virtuous. Being able to express love to anyone that you feel endeared to, feel that you want to bestow your love upon, to do good to foster a relationship with. Free love. Love anyone. Love and be loved. Be and let be. It's a free society. Just let that love unleash. It really sounds virtuous. It sounds yashar. And guess what? It's motivated by yashar, by a yashar tendency of man. Wouldn't you prefer love over violence and war? We would, really, ideally. However, that love has a definition. There's a discipline to that love, or at least the way that love plays out, physically speaking, and that is the Tov of the Torah, the absolute truth. Here, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the parameters of how to at least physically express love in terms of the building of relationships in a family. God gave us that structure. And God gave us that physical distinction in the genders. And therefore, God said, take your yashrut, take your natural, innate desire to love and bestow love upon others. And in terms of your relationship and the building of a family, use my Tov, use my Torah, and use the formula, therefore, of Tov v'Yashar. That will define your morality. That is the distinction between man's moral or sometimes immoral behavior and his standards in a given time and place of what is good and what is really good. Because some places in the Middle East, blowing yourself up in the name of God is spiritual and good. Well, for us, it's abominable. Only through the dictates of Torah, only through the principles, fundamental principles, of Torah, conveyed to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, can we assess and evaluate in every single situation and predicament in life, in every realm of society, of behavior, in every mode of behavior, what is the right way? It's only Hatov v'Hayashar. And therefore, Hayashar be'anav ya'aseh does have negative implications because it implies only our yashrut and only what we feel is right. And that's why there is a command, according to the Ramban and Mizbah Aseh, of acting Hatov v'Hayashar be'anei Adonai. Act in this world. Use as a compass God's Torah. And don't follow the relative standards of morality of the world around you. Rather, the absolute standards, moral standards of our Torah HaKedusha, defined by, in this parasha, as Tov v'Yashar. Shabbat Shalom.